Hello and most welcome to H848, and I will continue a little bit by talking about polarities and what distinctions does to thinking let's see here. Sorry for the division and their effects on reality and what happens. And I mentioned earlier that polarities is the taking away of choice. It's by vulgarizing the thing that is presenting itself, making it simpler, put it into categories that is already divided when you start. And it's important to understand this is implemented already when you are born. It's not something that you acquire. It's already there. It has always already been there, and it was always stay there. The choicelessness is not, in some way you could say, the choicelessness is not by your own choice. It is something that develops from the idea of the polarity of this staticness. And what we are born into is this, as Rosen said, Stephen M. Rosen, that is subject looking to subject in object in space, and everything is localized. It has its place in this empty homogeneous space, a space without any properties, a space that doesn't have difference in itself, a space that lends itself only to the effort to help establish localization, one could say. The whole idea with this homogeneous space is to have localization in a static way, and it's ridding the necessity, one could say, for a moving, living intention, a subject, a will. So what is getting established in this strictness is the very lack of an intention, meaning, a purpose. And once this lack, this stiffness is quite established, it's hardly established. What happens after that is immediately after the establishment, the will disappears from sight. And the will and its disappearance, it is exactly as it's never been there. And this is also something that can be felt. And I mentioned that many times. This is a sort of blandness to the world. It doesn't speak to you. It doesn't play. It's no movement in the world. Some people say that it has lost its soul. And I often think about this nostalgia that's so prevalent in the West for youth time. How we speak about youth as being the only time when we were happy, and we see children as the only ones that are truly happy, because after that comes responsibility, it comes more fixture, and everything becomes more and more localized. And I would say it starts with space, and it's sneaking up on you. All of a sudden, the playground is not as adventurous as it used to be. All of a sudden, human faces become more generalized. They are put into categories. One could call this a sort of a lockdown of reality. It's a locking mechanism. Think of it as screws that getting tighter and tighter, and it's not yourself that is getting screwed firmly to a localization, it's the whole space at the same time. So this is happening, and this is problematic in one way because that adds to the riddle. This is happening, this happens completely simultaneous in the subject and in the objective world. And it's this mutual simultaneity that is making it having this feel of reality. Would it be a sort of deviance of some sort? You would actually feel that there is a difference in the happening of the objective world and what you feel subjectively. But this is simultaneously. And of course, if you manage to think these things through and do some body activity as well, that I will come to that later, that also needs to be guided. Yoga exercises are quite excellent, done slowly, because they help to see that there is a difference between what is happening within you and what is happening in the objective world. And then you start to feel, yes, there is a change in the objective world when I, as a subjective person, change. The world doesn't look the same once you've done your yoga as it did before you did it. And this will also be experienced through time. That is, the more you train yoga, the more you look into this matter, do the construction, the more you will see that there is actually a difference. After the yoga, the world becomes more bright, shiny, illustrious. You become a person that is more together, stable. Balanced. There is an actually balancing up. And I think it starts in the space, as I said. That would be the first development in youth. The second stage is definitely time. You start school and you learn the times. And I remember myself that in the first grades in school, I did not notice time as such so much. And then it became more and more locked. And in this lockedness, I still think I felt that there was a difference in how I was as a person, my inside, my composure, my balance. And as soon as I was shocked out of balance, there was a difference in time in the outside. It became more limited. There were less things to choose in between, and everything became more less shaded. I think that's the right expression. And there is also a sense of mood. This mood sense is lack of energy, but less energy, correct. Still had energy, and that's a tricky one, because as long as you are young, you still have this vivid, livid energy. It's still pouring through your veins. You can still do the things, but it becomes slowly more and more cumbersome. It becomes more cumbersome, strenuous, harder, more difficult. And you get used to it. And this is of course very important. It is happening little by little. This doesn't take 1 day, 2 days. It goes through the years. And there is a stiffening up of the body. The distinction between lateral and dorsal become less and less accurate. It's a felt sense of lacking of accuracy. And I always felt that. I was looking at my handwriting. I've always been interested in handwriting. The difference in handwriting, whether it was before lunch, after lunch, in the late afternoon. It could be very clearly noted that it became less and less harmonious, less and less fluent. But I still had conception of that. So this is a very important thing. Now we're going to reverse the process, coming to that later. But when we start to reverse the process, it is very, very important to note the differences, to note how you change during the day. It's an absolute must to start to change. Because to continue what's happening in youth, I would say the next step in time is that you lose the sense that time is actually something that involves you. Time gets relocated to the outside all, and time is by that start a felt thing, only being, doing its action outside of yourself. And of course this is no doubt the position that Newton was in. He had an absolute felt sense that everything was outside of himself. His time is outside of himself, because he says there is a clock hanging about somewhere in the universe, and space is also outside Newton. You can do the conclusion, and I am pretty sure that's the correct one as well, that space is absolutely outside Newton himself. This becomes more and more established, it becomes firmer, and in the end you are you have relocated everything that is inside just to the outside, and the polarization has come to its, I could say, conclusion, its termination. You are on almost on the border of becoming one of these analytical philosophers like Quine, Norman Quine, who delegated everything to his outside. Something that much clearly can be questioned and shown to be absurdly wrong. It is causing paradoxes, but you swallowing up the paradoxes as they come up. You get used to them. You say, there's nothing special with those paradoxes. That time passes differently, you say, no, it's not real time that changes, it's your subjective time, you might say. That's not unusual to make the conclusion, yeah, it is actually happening outside yourself, and then you have a subjective time, a little bit like we discussed in this podcast many years ago. Oh, 1 year ago, I mean, last summer, when somebody said, I think it was Angela, that, well, I'll relax, I have my own time, but the objective time is still passing somewhere outside of her. I would say that's a locked position. As long as you have this differentiation of outside time in contrast to inside time, you will have that problem. Just give me a second here. Sorry.
English, lemon. Greek. Lemon. English, lemon. Lemon. Lemon.
Sorry, I had to take some water. I just had some salty things here.
Limon.
Well, it's a process of solidification. I think that's the best word, actually. Thank God for the water. I find the word. Everything becomes more solid, and you are relaying, if you understand that concept, relaying everything to a perceived outside. So time becomes more and more in this developing process in youth, going to adolescence, more and more directed to the outside, no longer being in the inside, coming to the outside, and all of a sudden you see all change that previously in you, if you changed, you felt this change in your mentality, your mind, and you saw, you felt that also gave a difference in the outside time. So you still have this simultaneity, but you felt that was a difference. That difference is very, very important to comment, reflect upon. This is what we call isolated reflection. Isolated reflection in that sense that you learn to understand, recognize, and put an, I would even say, an etiquette on it. And this is this very etiquette that makes it recognizable, so next time you can recognize it once more. That's the process of learning. And of course this could be different from different people. If you have a tough childhood or you are early on traumatized, this will happen so quickly and you can't even notice it. The sense of vulnerability and lack of energy is this very division or relaying of everything to be something that takes side only on the outside. And this very important term, only. It is when it's only happening on the outside. And in the third element to get affected, it's knowledge. And that's the last part of the process. It's the last cogwheel that locks the whole thing. So it's locked from all directions, and it also gives this idea this has always been the case. And the knowledge part is that knowledge is no longer affected how you feel, how you're balanced, how you sit. Are you sitting on the sit bones? Where are you, so to speak, located? Where are you located in space? Or are you located in time? And then we come to knowledge. And it's this localization of yourself that is disappearing, both in time and in space, and lost knowledge. And feeling yourself, having this body sense, the thing that the yoga or the Tai Chi, the Qigong can give back to you, the slow movement, that is something that helps this healing process. So one both needs to do something corporal, body needs to be involved, because the body is always more integrated than the mind, always, because the body is still in space, but it sort of took parts from the mind, getting them together, so to speak. It's a matter of saying. That's possibly not the best way or the most correct way, but I think it could help. And all pedagogical tools at this very level are going to be discarded later on. And this is, of course, something I mentioned before, and is that working tools for pedagogy needs to be wrong in a later process. Otherwise, they won't work with your level of being. You have to see that you're a subject understanding the word, and you are constantly already in it. I think this is what Heidegger meant when he said, "You have always been in the world." And that is a very important thing to understand. But it takes time. But once you understand it, you start to see that there is a more solid base of knowledge to gain. And knowledge, as I said, that's the third stage, and you feel in the beginning that it's a very clear connection of how you feel, how your brain is, how your mind is, and how much you understand something. And when you're tired, you understand less, and when time and space has been locked out, there is also less understanding. And I think that's the last connection to be lost, knowledge connection. And that goes slowly as well. It doesn't start, for me it didn't start until 8th, 9th grade in primary school. It continued in high school, and it was completely established in me by the 2nd grade. I have no felt feeling that my tiredness, my focus, my attention was part of the knowledge. The knowledge was out there. And it was for me only to acquire it. To conquer it, I think that could be a correct term to say. To conquer it and to make it mine. And that knowledge was owned. It was no longer part of me, it was outside of me, like owning a car, owning your clothes. Even if you carry them, it's not part of you. You own them, you have them on you, you feel the touch of it, but you're not with it. And this is the Dasein, of course, of Heidegger, being in it. And knowledge, time, space becomes forehand, you can say, from an Heideggerian viewpoint. Yeah, I think that's rather accurate. From an Heideggerian viewpoint, it becomes forehand, outside of yourself, no longer in your actual reality, in your lived, perceived reality. And this is also, to give you a hint, this is also the highing up of reflective consciousness. Richard E. Lynn talked about that, and that gave me some really great clues in understanding how the process works, what way it works, where is it going. And starting from second grade, there was no longer a sense that I grew intellectually, because I could only measure that in how many. At that time, I think the grade system was 1 to 5, how many 5s I got, how many 4s I got. It was something calculated, it was outside of and I owned the knowledge. I was no longer developing. And actually the very term developing came to be something outside myself. You can only calculate that. You can calculate the knowledge, more or less like an IQ test, measure it from the outside. But there's no progress going on with you as a whole. You're not becoming more balanced, become less balanced. You do not internalize your understanding anymore. And your intention is weakening in this process. It's definitely weakening. It's weakening in a stable, predictable manner. Little by little, you lose your ki, your chi, your prana. And prana is the one that makes the superposition to collapse. You be able to be the creator of your own world. Already, you started instead to think that you are moving about in a world, like almost moving about in a map, a pre-arranged map. Think of a map of the old city of Stockholm. You learn the roads, you learn the crossings, you learn take a left, take a right, but the map has already been there. Space is always there. And this is of course the view of knowledge by our mutual friend, as we know, Henry, who tried to learn the encyclopedia in Sweden by heart. He was completely delegated everything, relayed everything to the outside, and therefore knowledge could only be counted, measured, and there was no progression. And this is something we so often see in Western society today. It is normal to be a teacher, a wise person, not having a posture, not having a balance, being out of control even. I've seen professors who've been throwing things, throwing tantrums, being sad, being unbalanced, and their knowledge is completely outside of themselves. Their knowledge that they gain do no longer help them in their lives. It doesn't make their marriage better, doesn't make their relationship better. That is outside the scene. And you don't get healthier. This is completely ridiculous from a Confucian or Taoistic scene in China, for instance. Read so many books that criticize Western knowledge, where you can even get sicker when you learn more. You don't develop your body. It's this separation, and very few Western thinkers has pointed this out. Derrida indicated it only. Heidegger mentioned, I think, in passing by, that good understanding of the world is good health. It is feeling better, body and soul. But it's only hinted. It's barely even a quote. This is the most important. And another thing about this is being self-supportive, being a person in itself, being an individual, and that is completely lacking in Western society or Western knowledge or of today especially. It was still known by people in the Renaissance, great geniuses. Painter Titian often mentioned that this knowledge saved him from being dependent on others for their views, and that is something that is shut out of the case. Since knowledge is outside of us, it's just different levels of knowledge you can get. You don't further or make your individuality stronger. Instead, you have these bits of knowledge. There is 5 points there and there's 5 points there. You add them, you put them in a bag. That bag you own, almost like a wallet. And they keep your knowledge, and you can have it as a diploma. And of course, there's nothing wrong with a diploma. This is not the point I'm making here, but its knowledge is only the diploma. We call the student expedition and ask, how many points do I have, or how many successful terms do I have? If it's only that, if you don't progress and get more individual, more live, more real, and being able to a greater extent to understand both yourself and the world, and that has to, 100% has to come at exactly the same time. There can be no progression in knowledge of the world if your body is not getting more balanced. Cannot be left out of the picture. It's ridiculous. I think the other day we discussed the mind-body split, but it is nothing to discuss, it's something to work with. You need to develop the body as well, because when it's shut out, knowledge goes out of the window at the very same time. It is completely inevitable from this process. So knowledge is, as you hear, maybe the one thing that can speak much clearlier and more to the heart than time and space. I think at some process, time and space seem to be perceived as being very abstract, not something important. But it is not abstract at all. There's no abstraction level on space, but it will feel that way in the beginning. But as the process develops, progresses, you will once more feel that space is incredibly important, and you feel that I have space once more and I can breathe out. It is all around me. It's living and it is amazing. It has its fractal nature and depth. I mentioned before this sense of depth, and it's a living depth. It's not this shallow surface areas that are put on top of each other and that to make a third dimension. That's a dead and out space. Yeah, I think it's actually me as my abstract background, knowledge seems to be something that is easier to grasp. Knowledge part, as time and space do most instantly, at most instances, feel more abstract somehow, not something that would affect me. And sometimes it's closer, especially as early today I was standing on a large hill looking down hundreds of meters, almost Similar to that feeling I had the other day when I was in Yaso. How are you? Almost the way I felt the other day when I was earlier today when I was a couple of months ago I was standing on this very nice mountain in middle of Sweden, and I was looking out of the world and I was taking it in all, and it was this wondrous feeling of being present, being in space, living, actualizing everything, being in the world, present. And it's this balance coming up. Soon as you take in space, the balance develops. Knowledge is similar, and how odd that even may sound, I'm starting to perceive that more and more. And we went into different areas, like that started with Barbara Tversky, or even started earlier with Lakoff and Johnson, to understand that the most abstract things take the start with the body. And doesn't that show the connection? That the more you are in the body, the more you are in reality, the more you can take in knowledge and be in knowledge. The more you take in that, the more you localize, and this is a very important thing. When you have this subject in space in front of object, you have no localization of self. Your body doesn't know where it is in time, doesn't know where you are in space. Even this sounds abstract, you can understand it from an abstract level, and that's the first step. And this is why I go through these theory-like things, because this will become absolutely corporal in the end. And this is a thing that you used to have as a younger person. In youth, you had this absolute presence in space and time. And as it progressed, you went down the ladder, so to speak, and it became more and more narrow, became more and more shut out, and it started to live its own life. And all of a sudden you are this subject walking on the timeline, seeing things on the road passing your by. You're constantly passing, and you are no longer present in the living reality. Γεια σας, γεια σας. Καλά είσαι? Καλά.
Είσαι εκεί δίπλα απέναντι.
Ναι, έτσι.
Και ήθελα να σε δω. Τι λέει?
Hans.
Θα κάτσεις εδώ τώρα?
Ναι.
Θα φύγεις?
Ναι.
Μας έπαιρνε τηλεόραση τώρα, γι' αυτό σου λέω ρε.
You're in the picture. Yes.
Στο στράτο, τον πήγα στο στράτο.
Ναι.
Στο στράτο. Ο πόλεμος μπάμπου.
Ο πόλεμος μπάμπου. Περιμένετε. Ο πόλεμος. This is this solidification of knowledge. Becomes something outside of yourself. It's something that you acquire, and then you own it, and it's always put in your pocket. It's fragmented, it is divided, it can be arranged. They can be arranged, it can be stored on top of each other, it can become more and more, so it sort of piles up. And you see this is coming from Lakoff also. I think they show with excellency how the body gets divided from reality somehow, and I'm trying to show a deconstruction of this idea, which I'm making my very own deconstruction here, is that they are always the same thing, the very same thing. And you're shutting out of knowledge by leaving the body outside the picture. It's not a small thing. And we discussed this the other day. We're still having these classes about pilgrimage, and we discussed that. And it seemed in this 2 hours discussion, it was never mentioning that the body wasn't something that was completely evident what it was. Never mentioned. I had to mention it at the end. That for example, Adiyasas. For example, for Oriental, the body is more mysterious, our conception of body. Whereas all Westerners think directly that body is nothing mysterious. It's a piece of matter, it's made out of that outside thing at the end of this progression to solidification. I'm talking about 2nd grade in high school now. And the body is completely outside. It's made of matter. And of course, this is the very majority idea of every scholar today. I don't think there is any disagreement, to be honest. There are some middle ways, people who are trying to find some sort of middle way, and they say, yes, maybe the soul is emerging from this solid matter. And I think that's driving into sensonico. That is a one-way hill, one-way street. It doesn't get you anywhere. In the end, it doesn't get you anywhere, and it gets you more and more solidified. I would say choiceless. And this is this choicelessness when the world is stabilizing cause and effect. So is it cause and effect I haven't mentioned so much, and that is also part of the process. And part of the process is this idea that the outside things are regulating themselves. What do I mean by regulating themselves? Well, cause and effect comes into action, and that happens directly, simultaneously, cannot be separated. And when this happens, you get the idea that the outside world is doing its own work, and then you have what we usually call determinism. Determinism means that the cause and effect chain is locked. You have no participation in it. You are not in the process. Yes, sir. Yes, ukalaise kala, ola kala. And another important part of this whole thing, this progression, going from youth up to when knowledge becomes solidified and no longer movable, and when cause and effect comes into action, it gets something stabilized, and you have determinism, you have no longer a soul, you have no longer a God, anything like that. That's impossible. I was mentioning this middle way persons like Chalmers is a very good example, the Australian philosopher of cognition / scientist, very good. His middle point is saying something to the effect that from matter consciousness is erupting, but that won't work because you still have this idea of the subject being divided or apart from reality. And as long as you have a world that is ruled by cause and effect, what is the idea of will? It doesn't make any sense. And it's an impossibility by the very worldview.
When?
No, now.
Which place?
To Cassandria.
Aha.
So what happens is everything gets shut out and it's no longer part of the process, and by not being part of the process anymore, you will feel that there is no place for any will at all, because will is replaced by cause and effect. And if you're only, like Chalmers, trying to smoothen up one side of the division, you will be still locked in the idea of the world being outside, out of your choice, out of your will, out of your intention. And that will mean that you're still completely choiceless. And it will also mean you cannot choose worldview. There's no choice here anymore. You cannot say, like Chalmers, that you have a free will or you have a consciousness. That's mainly consciousness is saying here. That's impossible. So both things needs to be dissolved, looked into, under careful observation to this to be made. And this is how we reverse the process. And how we reverse the process will be the knowledge for my next episode, and will follow promptly. But anyway, more about that later. It was very interesting, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.